Hey everybody, welcome back and thanks for tuning in. Today I'd like to talk to you about the GetGood Drums Invasion sample library. I'd like to go over four main points in this video, the first of which would be a basic overview of the library and sort of how it functions. The second is I'd like to explain the order of operations of how it goes from the library to the DAW. The third thing is an inside look at how I like to route the drum kit. And the fourth is it's going to be sprinkled throughout the video, which is basically some tips on what types of processing you can use for your sessions. Just to let you know, this video isn't necessarily going to be about the specifics or parameters of each individual plugin. This isn't the kind of thing where it's like, hey, check this out, copy it to your session, and expect it to be great. This is more of a guide of what you can use this drum kit for. So I'd like to get started. So let's get into it. You can see in front of you, we have the drum kit right here. And on the front page, in the main full kit here, you can see there's tabs to kind of navigate throughout different sections of it. And up here, you can choose like different like presets that the guys put together when they made this library. So you can choose theirs. I like to go with the default kit that's raw, but the high CPU version, so that you get the full access to like the highest quality of the samples that you can. And I like to basically treat the sample library as if it's a real drum kit coming into a recording session. So I use no processing from the start, and I just try to choose the drums. So you can see throughout the kit they have these little tabs. You can choose different cymbals. You can even say none if you know you want a simpler kit to have less options. I like to use the full kit for at least this specific song that we did, and you can see all these different options. Everything has basically at least a second option, if not a third. The snare, there's multiple snare options. This is the classic Vinnie Paul snare, and yeah, it's really cool. You can choose various different combinations of the kit to your own liking. But yeah, so you can also choose the computer scaling so that it uses a little less of your computer to run, because this is a pretty hefty library, and it can kind of bog your computer down if you don't have these specs to handle it. But I like to run it on high because fortunately I have those specs to run the library in the full mode. You have two fader options on here. One is the master volume and the other is the reverb. You can apply certain reverbs to certain parts of the kit, and the reverb master control will be right there. You can see in contact down here you have your choices of the notes. I'll explain how you can lay that out in a custom layout if you want in a few. So let's go to the second page. So now you start to see within all these pages here, there's like a mixer for each section. You will see that this is basically a microphone selection, or not microphone selection, but more like a fader control of the microphone that they use to record the sample. So when they sample the kick, they hit the kick drum, and it's recorded in what looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different selectable options with an additional kick trigger that they've programmed in to add how you like. This part is really important throughout all of these, to find the balances, which will take some time. But that's like a thing you have to do once you have your whole kit laid out how you want it. You have to start listening and without any processing on it after you've already routed it to however, and that then you'll see how you can customize it to sound more like a real kit, or take certain things out that normally would be problematic when you're recording a real drum kit. It's quite flexible and it's pretty awesome. But back to the basic parts of this, you have your panning, your mute, and your solo for each channel. You can flip the phase here if there's any phasing issues. And these are obviously your faders, and this is where you can route things out to separate outputs. Now, over on this side, you can control the pitch of each one. When you click between different ones like this, you can change the pitch of the actual drums in case there's something you want it to be lower or higher, or if you have the snare and you want to tune it a little bit closer to the song. That's a really useful technique. So beyond that, there's the envelope filter, which gives you these options here. You can adjust these and apply how much of that is going to like each channel. Same thing with reverb. You can add reverb to specific channels like this. And the turbo is a neat function that they added, which kind of creates a more, how do I describe it? It's almost like it sounds like they did a little bit of processing on their own and gave you the option to turn it up or down or off completely. And you can see on some of these, I left it on, and some of them I took it off. That's something you just got to play with and see what you like. And with the one shot, you can control the sample if you want it to be like the same sample every time when it plays over, or if you want it to do the round robin effect where it plays multiple samples of the same thing to kind of give it a little bit less of that machine effect. But sometimes the machine gun effect is what you're going for, depending on your type of music or what you're trying to do. On the left side here, this is where you can also change, just like we were talking about in the full kit over here. You could select different like drums, different choices. You can do the same thing for each channel once you start flipping through. When we get to the toms, you'll see that when you change these channels, it gives you the different toms in the picture. But you can change the actual kick drum here on this page as well. And then the kick trigger, which is on this channel, they give you multiple options of different types of samples you can use that they've selected for you. So moving on to the snare, you can see same idea, basically the exact same thing. And for each one of these shell drums, they give you, the close mic. And for the kick drum, they have a sub kick, which is a specific type of kick drum mic that it almost looks like a mini snare that they put up against the drum, and it captures the low end of the kick drum much differently than a regular kick drum mic. And they give you the kick trigger and then the overheads. These are the same overheads that they use for the entire kit when they sample, but they give you separate control of each section. And then they have a room mic that's close and a room mic that's far, and you can adjust that as well. So that's how they lay this out between all of the shells. You can see the same thing here: snare top, snare bottom. They put a microphone on the bottom of the snare, and the snare trigger is the same idea as the kick drum. They trigger it off of the original snare, and they give you multiple options to choose from right here. Overheads, same idea. Rooms, same idea. And the thing about the overheads and the rooms that is pretty cool is that you can choose how wide you want them to sound. It has a spread effect where you can make it sound a little bit wider, or you can thin it out, and you can customize that however you like as well. Moving on to the toms, you can see I did a little bit of the turbo, and by a little bit I mean a lot of bit. I just went all the way up. I seem to like it when I set it up that way. And same idea, each tom has its own channel and gives you multiple options here for the set. They batch these three together just because the way that they lay it out. When you click on this one, it switches, or I'm sorry, there's a page here. You can turn the page to get to the second layer of toms, 4 through 6. But you have the 6 toms here, and you can pan them however you like. I pan them a little differently. You can pan them however you like. The third floor tom is naturally on the opposite side, as you can see in the full kit. They put it over on this side, which is a pretty cool option. I like that. I like it for when you're hitting 2 toms at the same time and get more of a stereo effect. Probably the intention. Overheads, same deal. Room mics, same deal. All these options on the side here are the same as well. And the cymbals, you can see they've put a close mic on the hi-hats and on the X-hats, which are like an auxiliary set of hi-hats on the opposite side. And the ride mic with the effects symbols being all of these little splashes and bells and mini chinas and stuff like that. That's all been summed for you rather than giving you an individual mic on each one of those into this effects symbols here. And the overheads, again, same idea. Room mics the same. When you adjust these here, you're adjusting just the close mics, or in this specific example, the effects symbols are a sum of whatever close mics they used for these types of things. But this will give you the individual control of the close mic effect, and then the overheads will be different. Now, what's nice about this is that the overheads, you can go into the settings here, and there's 3 windows, which I'll explain, but the middle one here, symbol mixer, you can control how much of each one of these symbols goes to either the overheads, the room that's close, or the room mic that's far, and you can customize how much of each goes to those. So you have the balance of the effect symbols, the hi-hat, and the ride individually like that, but to be more specific, in the overhead section, you can blend in more or less hi-hats. You can add the 2 splash cymbals. You can see that I turn the center splash cymbal up louder, and you can customize it that way however you want. So then what it comes down to is balancing the close mics versus the overheads, and you do that by listening to your drum kit with no processing on it. Once it's all routed out properly, you listen to it, and you create your MIDI performance, and you just jump between the different cymbals as you're playing. What I like to do is create a beat that's just like really simple, riding on a cymbal like that with a snare in between, and then like a very simple kick pattern. And then I'll take that right hand and I'll go to this cymbal, and then I'll go to that cymbal, and then I'll go to this one. And then when I get those groups, like if I were to do all of the splash cymbals at once, I would start with one, I would go to the next one, I'd go to the next one, and then I'd adjust the MIDI so that it jumps between them. So it's da 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 da, and then find that balance, even it out. And then I would compare that to the overheads versus the close mics, or in that specific example would be the overheads versus the effects symbols fader. And just finding those balances is what's really important with this library. And it'll take you a while because there's a lot of options, and you got to really get the hang of how you want it. With the room mics, you can do the same thing. Personally, I like to take the cymbals out of the room mics because I like the liveliness of the drums rather than the rooms. And I wouldn't say that every engineer would say the same thing, but there's probably a lot of people that would agree that it would be nice to remove as much cymbals as possible from room mics. But that's a stylistic thing, so don't feel like that's the law, because it's not. Now, in this same settings folder, there's the mappings. What I did is I erased the map that existed and completely started from scratch, because sometimes some DAWs, or not DAWs, but some sample libraries like Superior or Drumforge or Easy Drummer, they have different layouts for where they usually put the drum kits, or I should say Stephen Slade as well. Some of them have different layouts, and sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they even give you the option to choose something from another developer so that it's easy to just kind of jump between the different plugins. So you'll see in here, it gives you the option to use different pre-programmed ones or create your own custom. So I created a custom one because what I like to do is starting from the lowest key in the piano, starting from the kick and just going right down the list, totally in a row all the way through. And the reason being is because I like it to just be in order. I don't like any gaps. I don't like having a strange layout that like has cymbals below the kick drum or cymbals above and toms, either top to bottom or bottom to top. Sometimes they're backwards. And created my own so that it's just straight down the line. It's easy, one-to-one. That would be the term you would use, just right from the beginning all the way down in a row, one-to-one. And that's how I like to do it. So you can choose your layout in here by clicking this and selecting your note on the piano, or you can press the record button here and hit if your MIDI's hooked up, you can hit the button and it'll sense it. You can use a second option as well if you have if you want to do it in 2 places. Sometimes people like to play the drum kits and they want to do it with 2 hands. They can separate it so that it plays right, left, and you can put them in different places like that. But yeah, so this is how I like to lay out the the mappings. I saved my own version of it. You can shift it, like you can shift the notes over through this button. You can clear the map, save it. You can import your own. This is helpful if you're using multiple libraries or multiple sessions, or if you're going to another studio and they have the same setup, you can import your own library as well. With this is your velocity curve. You can adjust how the samples react to the velocities in your MIDI when you turn them up and turn them down. You can create a curve so that it's a little bit more gentle or a little bit more harsh. It all depends on how you like to do it. I've never really felt the need to mess with it, but maybe I'm missing something. So if I am, share your feelings on how maybe you've done it before. Okay, so that pretty much covers the mappings, I believe. And here you can see the velocity curve. They give you different options to turn it on and select it. Like if I were to do this, go to the snare, I can change it to be different like that. But I'm going to not do that because I don't know what it's going to do to how I have it. You can do it globally across everything. You can do it across these specific customized channels to see how you like. And then there's a groove player. And this, whenever you get MIDI packs, like the Halpern packs or the Halpern 2 packs or the Rudy grooves, I think it is. There's a handful of ones that GGD has released that are great. And you can see them all in here, and this is where you'll basically choose what you want. It'll play a groove that's already pre-programmed. I've never used that before because I always like to do my own through MIDI, and that's just how I've always done it. But there are the options to use this drum library with MIDI packs that have been created by artists and companies. So the rest here is stuff that I haven't messed with, and I just hit this load all button, so I imagine it's doing something that I probably don't want. You can change it so that your presets can't be locked, or I'm sorry, you can lock your presets so that they can't be changed. And for the sake of what I just did, I'm going to go back to my settings and bring back what I had. Another important tool is to use the settings feature of your DAW to save what you've done per group or per album or whatever you do, so that you can compare, or you can have custom layouts for everybody else. It's super helpful so that you don't have to rebuild this every single time. Let's see if there's anything else that I missed. Yep, I think we got it all. I feel like there's one other thing, but maybe I'm making that up. Sometimes they give you a bleed option where you can control the bleed, but this drum kit, I think they just took care of that already. Probably why I like it so much, because it just makes sense how it is. Okay, so that's kind of like the basic overview of the functionality of the library. Once you have all those things taken care of, which I know probably sounds like a lot of what I just went over, then you can rely on just your MIDI to play the drums for you. So, second thing that I wanted to talk about was the order of operations of how it gets to your DAW. So, starting from the library itself, which is this, the Kontakt library, everything starts here. So the drum kit is sourced from Kontakt. When you have all these channels, you can route them out. So you have to basically create a mixer within Kontakt, which by default, Kontakt starts with, I think, 1 stereo channel and 4 auxes. Just don't even think about the auxes. I've never used them for this example. I'm sure they're very useful, but I've never needed them for the drum kit thing. So what I do is, you can see in Kontakt here, this is the player library, just so you know, the free library. The output section, you can create your channels, and I believe that there's some videos out there about how to set this up, because you want to set it up prior to loading the library, And then there's like a trick with Kontakt where you create your layout, save it, you save it as a default, and then you have to close it and reopen it in order for it to like set right, which is kind of strange, but it's one thing you just got to work around. I don't know why it hasn't been fixed yet, but it's just a weird thing. But once you get the hang of it, it's not a big deal. Anyway, so I've created the layout. I thought about how many channels I wanted. It's really important to know how many channels you want this drum kit to be once it gets to your DAW. So you have to have the foresight to know I want X amount of kick channels, X amount of snares, X amount of buses for this or that, and then do that input list and create the right amount of channels. So what I did here is I created the input list for that. Starting from the top, we're going to ignore these ones here because this is more relevant to the DAW, but let's just look at these ones here first. So we know we have a kick drum sub, a kick trigger, and this is an optional kick sample. So we're not going to think about that at the moment. We're just going to do these three. So these come from Kontakt: kick, kick sub, and kick trigger. And then in the snare section, we have the same thing, just these three. And then we have the toms. And then I created an overhead shells, and I'll explain why in just a moment. With the cymbals, you have the hi-hats, the X-hats, the ride, the effects cymbals, and the overheads. And then the rooms, you have close and far. So if we add those up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Right? Did I count that right? 19. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Sorry, 18. I counted an extra one. So I know I need 18 channels coming from Kontakt. So back to Kontakt. I created 18 channels of output here. Sometimes it's good to create an extra one just in case. If you're like, oh, you know what, I want to add a sample to it, you can add another library into Kontakt, like a second drum library, meaning it'll show up down below it, and you can take a sample from that library and run it to an additional track. That's just a cool thing you can do on top of it, but we're not going to dive into that because that's more complicated and you don't need to know it at the moment. So kick drum, kick sub, kick trigger, just like this in the library here. I should make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. Maybe it'll help if I turn the keyboard off. Okay. So starting on the kick tab, you remember there's the kick sum, kicks, sub kick, kick trigger, overheads, close and far. So right underneath it, you have your routing. So this is the thing that's going to show up weird if you don't restart Kontakt once you've created your channels and saved it and then reopened it. Like if you were to create these outputs, it wouldn't reflect the same here. So what you had to do is you had to know how many channels you want, add all the channels in to Kontakt, label them if you want. It's just gonna, yeah, you'd want to label them. Definitely label them because you want to save it. And then when you go to save, save current output selection state as a default for whatever. So this is the VST plugin, so I would save it as that. Next time I open it, this mixer will show up like this. And then when I load the library in, all the channels that I labeled here will reflect properly here. You have to do this every time you use a different library too. It's just something you have to work through when you use different drum libraries that have different outputs. Otherwise, you just use the main stereo channel, but don't worry about that for now. Anyway, back to the routing. So you're going to route your kick drum, the kick, or your kick sum. I just labeled it kick because it's easier. And then your kick sub is going to go to your kick sub trigger here and so on. The overheads. Now, here's something that I wanted to share is that the overheads, I separate those into the overhead shells and overhead cymbals. So I have one for just drums and one for just cymbals. And that's because I like to process them differently. If you want to do it more traditional, you would normally just put it to one overhead channel and then adjust the microphone sends. You know, you think about these faders as sends. It's like these are sending this signal to this track. Okay. And then this will show up in your DAW So these are sending to those. So that's the basic layout of how it gets from the library to the DAW. Starts here at the library, and then it gets sent to the contact mixer, which then gets sent to your DAW. So with the routing, again, your overheads are going to go to, for me, the overhead shells, which I put here. And then the room close and room far are going to go respectively to each room close and room far. And then on the snare, same idea. All the snares go to the proper snare channels here, and the overheads, again, go to the same overhead shell, the same close and far. One thing you need to remember to not get confused by is that these aren't individual outputs per drum. Like, you don't want an overhead kick drum output and an overhead snare output and an overhead close output for just the kick drum. You don't want to have like just a kick overhead. Let me rephrase that. You don't want a kick overhead channel and a snare overhead channel and a tom 1 overhead channel and a tom 2 overhead channel and so on. You just want all of the drums to go to the same overhead channel. So that's why I created one overhead shells channel here for all those to meet it. And then it goes out to the DAW, process it that way. Same thing with the cymbal, or the toms rather. You'll see every tom goes to its own right down here, tom 1 through 6, to label them however you want. Overheads, rooms, same thing. Cymbals, same thing. Hats, X hats, ride, effect cymbals, overheads for the cymbals, overhead cymbals, see how it goes to that one. And then the rooms all collect there. And you can see in my mixing here, I choose to have no cymbals go to the rooms. And that's just because that's what I want to do. Don't just do that because I'm doing it. Do it because you know why. The reason why I don't do it is because I want certain tones in the rooms and I want to get rid of ones. If I'm going to try to EQ them out, I might as well just take them out. So that's how I remove them from the source. Okay. Now, here's the thing. Once you have this all routed into Contact and it's all sending out your DAW, it'll show up, depending on what program you use, it'll show up for Cubase like this. As long as you go to your tab, which I know my face is in the way, but this one says GetGood Drums. This is my rack instrument where the tracks are all above. But if you click on that, that shows you there. Right over here, let me see if I can move this. I don't think I can. Okay, so basically I'll show you in a different library because my dumb face is in the way. This little button right here will show you the outputs. So see, all of these outputs are from the Contact library that I set up. So you enable these and they all show up. And you enable them, they show up like this over here. So when they show up over here and I label them properly, mind you that there's extra channels in here. Like all the ones in capitals are extras. I'll explain that in a moment. Over in your mixer, I'll show up here. Obviously you can see, for those who are not familiar with Cubase, here's all my plugins. These are some sends, and these are all the different channels. The blue ones are buses, the white ones are audio, and the white ones are regular channels, I should say, and the purple ones are effects. So back to my input list here. What I've done, once all these channels, these ones we went over earlier, show up in Cubase, this is where we're getting into the routing portion of what I wanted to talk to you about. I like to route them into the DAW, and then when they get to the DAW, then I start to sum them into buses. And from there, they get summed again to another set of buses that simplify into sections, and then they go to a final bus and go out to the main 2 bus or the stereo bus or the master mix, whatever you like to call it. So first things first, I set up the kicks, and then what I like to do, this is optional, is I'll create an effects send off of the original kick and use that as an additional trigger if I want to add a sample to the drum kit. I'll use trigger 2 and then whatever I decide to blend. In this specific kit that you're going to hear in a little bit, I do not have any kick sample on it because at the time of doing this, I didn't feel I needed it. But it's still there as an option. If at any point in my demoing or mixing process I want to add, it's there. Same thing goes for the snares. Is that off of the original snare, there's an effects send to another channel that's the snare sample and a snare room sample. The snare sample I do use, and I use the room sample as well because it adds a different element that I like in the kit. Now, what's important to know about those 3 is that you want to send it pre-fader, because I don't want the level of, how I'm mixing it to affect how it's getting triggered, because the triggers are going to be going off of the velocity of the drum, not MIDI velocity, but the actual velocity of the drum. So if it comes in quiet, it's going to be different than if it comes in loud, and it's going to trigger differently. And if you decide to do it post fader, then when you later in your mixing process are like, oh, the snare's too loud, or the blend isn't right, you turn that down, it's going to affect how much of it is sent to your kick, or to your snare trigger, I should say, because we're talking about the snare. So I do it all pre-fader for that reason. So what I do with these sections, same thing with the toms, is I'll send them all to a summing bus. So all the kicks, including the sample, whether I use it or not, are going to one kick bus. Okay. All the snares go to one snare bus. All the toms go to a tom bus. The overhead shells is on its own for the moment. And then the cymbals, these are all the same channels that are coming out of contact and going into the DAW. I'll combine those into one cymbal bus. And then the rooms, I will take those rooms and combine them into one room bus. So then something I like to do with the kick is I'll send post fader to the bass guitar as a side chain. And that's just stylistically because when the bass and kick drum are fighting for the same space, you like to have the bass duck out of the way so that you can hear the kick drum, and finding that balance is important for certain styles. So I like to set that up as well. That's post fader because when you turn the kick up and down, you want it to reflect how much is going to your bass. And you'll find that if you do it the opposite way, you may be not controlling the amount of ducking that the bass is doing for the kick drum the same way that it would if it was post fader. So it's the opposite effect of what we talked about with the sampling of the actual drums. Now, once you have those things bust into all kicks, all snares, all toms, all cymbals, all rooms, then what I like to do is take all of the drums, which would be all of these, kick, snare, and toms, and the shells, I'll say that as well, and I like to put that into a shells bus. Okay, you'll see that down here. It all goes to a drum shells bus that just processes the shells, and that's because there's a certain type of compression I like to do on just those, separate from the cymbals. I like to do that before they meet up. So after that, then we mix all, you can see here how I broke it down, the shells, kick, snare, toms, and overhead shells. I like to take the full drum kit and mix it all together into a full kit bus. So we have the shells that we just made, all the cymbals, and all the rooms, they go to a full kit. So this is like the grand picture of what is one channel that has the stereo image of the entire kit sound like all together in one. It's almost the last step. After we have the full kit, I like to take and send that to the final stage, which is the all drums bus, along with a parallel compression bus. Now, this is the kind of thing that you use for adding a little bit of inconsistency and live compression. That's just, it's really aggressive, so it adds this like kind of pulsing effect that makes it sound a little bit more lively. And it's a great technique. There's so much information out there about it and a lot of different techniques and ways to do it, so I recommend looking into that as well. Now, the way that we do the paracomp is from the full drum kit, we send an effects send, just like we did with the triggers for the drums, like the kick and the snare. We send it pre-fader, again, same thing, to a bus. So it goes from the full kit to a parallel compression, so they're both working together, and then they both meet back up. They both meet back up at a full all drums bus, and that's the last one, and that gets sent off to the last stage or wherever you want it to go. So let's take a look here at my drum layout. I'm in the way again, down in the corner, but you'll see here's where it starts. So from all these drums here, kick sub, kick trigger, kick sample, these all are going to the bus right here. The snare all get combined here, the toms get combined here, cymbals are here, the rooms are right here. Those all, once the drums get combined at the shells here, the shells mix with the cymbals in the rooms and meet up at the full drum kit right here. And then it gets sent to the paracomp, and then these two go to the last stage right here, the full all drums bus. Now, some tips here on what I like to do with the drums. If you start from the individual ones, I like to, you'll notice along the top here, a lot of the first ones are either compressors or EQs. What I like to do is take a listen to each individual element. So let's start with just the kick. And this is gonna, if I play like this, you'll hear all the processing that happens after, but if we were to just listen to the kick drum as an example, let me turn this stuff off. Okay, yep. Okay, so just the kick drum. So there's not too much here different. Now what I'll do is I'll listen to each element and I'll take out the little things that I definitely know are either problematic or I just don't like, or I'll boost things that I feel like could make it a little bit better. But anything that's like going to happen to all of them, like if I have, let's use the snare as an example. If I know that all the snares are going to have a roll off on the bottom and I'm not going to use certain frequencies below, I won't do it to every single track. I've learned that it actually can function a little better when it's just on the bus. Unless it's obviously getting in the way and it's causing problems with the compressor or something like that on that channel, I'll take that off later in the chain. Less processing, less math, stuff like that, computer things. Save your computer from having to process as much stuff. So I basically go through each individual element and take away anything that is obviously harmful or that I don't like, and then I'll compress where needed, whether I need it to be a little bit more squashed, or if you need to control the dynamics of something, I'll do a little bit on each channel if necessary. Remember that with like samples and snares and blending multiple snares together, the more processing you do individually, the tougher it can be to control later. I find that when I'm doing snare, I like to, again, just find the little elements that I like or don't like and use the EQ to adjust that, compress where needed, again. But when we get to the final bus, it's all about like the just the snare bus. Let's see if I can make that happen. Turn this stuff back on. When we go to the snare, we're going to take off the samples that I added. So with the regular, just the regular snare, let me take all this compression off. This will be just the snare that came from the library. The bottom snare. Find the balance that you like. And then this is the trigger that comes with the kit that you can choose, one of the ones you can choose. Okay. And you can see that on the first one I did a little bit of EQ. I used a little bit of compression on that real snare to kind of give it some pop that I felt it needed. And the snare bottom is just a little bit of treatment to get rid of anything that's definitely not needed. Typically it's the stuff on the bottom end. With the snare trigger, just a little bit of EQ, and then I found that balance. See how I have this curve going? I got that balance of what I like. You can apply the same thing to the snare sample. So when I put the sample in, you hear there's the trigger here, and then this one's muted, but this one is how I like to EQ it. Notice there's not like a ton of compression happening here. So that's blended together. Same thing with the room. See, it widens it out a lot. And remember, this is just the close mics of the snare. This isn't like the close mics of the snare and the two samples that I added. This doesn't have the room mics in it like the actual room mics from the drum kit. That can add a different flavor as well. So then through this snare bus process, you can see this is where I got a little more detail. I got into EQ. I used some heavy compression. I used a clipper to create the clipping effect, and then it's just some final stages of the EQ. And mind you, this is going from the snare to the shells bus, then to the full kit, parallel compression onto the final stage. So I do the same thing for the toms. I found that these toms sound great. Like this drum kit's toms are awesome. They're my favorite of all the different GetGood drums that they've used. They have a lot of top end and they're strong on the low end. The one thing I find about a lot of these toms that they have is that the resonance is fairly long. So what I like to do is first I'll do a little bit of compression, and then I'll do some EQ that kind of takes out some of the low end, the low mid stuff that I definitely don't want. I'll use it to spike the top if I need more attack, and then boosting like the fundamentals of each drum. You have to find those and see where you like it, and to hopefully avoid that like basketball hitting the ground effect that you get from certain toms. So I'll use the EQ to shape those very, very specific to each drum. And then I put a gate on as well. The gate helps to control some of that resonance. You can hear where the gate kind of cuts it off a little bit. Some of these toms hang out really long, which is problematic when you're doing metal, because metal, you want things to be tight and fast. And this kit, being that it's pretty much presented as like a very aggressive sort of death metal type kit, you want that fast, that you want things to get out of the way after they've been hit, so that the next hit that comes in so fast after that still has clarity and it's not muddied up by the previous overhang of certain drums. So you want it to be fast and attacky. So I use a gate on there. They go over to the toms bus where I just do some final stage of compression. Once I have my kick drum, my snare, and my toms done, that's when I mix them at the shells bus, which you'll see is just some more EQ to fine tune it. And then I'll use something like the SSL channel, really for just compression mainly, just to give it the pumping effect. Moving on to the cymbals here, I like to take the balances. Remember we were talking about the balances earlier, about getting the hi-hats, or not hi-hats, but the actual spot mics of the cymbals versus the overhead blend, and finding that balance. So this is where you'll hear I did like, if I take the overhead cymbals off, you'll hear how I blended the first part. So you can hear where the blend is. You can hear that the ride cymbal's a little louder on the spot mics, and mainly because in this example I like to have the actual bell really loud. But when you hear it in just the overheads, you hear a bit more of the room sound of the cymbals, but you also hear the crashes, because the crashes aren't on spot mics. They're just in the overheads. But you can still hear the other ones, like the ride. That balance is really important of finding where you want that to be. They all mix here at the cymbals bus. After they each get a little bit of treatment, I like to find like the ring of certain cymbals that are like certain frequencies that are just really ugly to the ear, or just hang on forever. Or if I need to carve room for a different cymbal to exist, or for the vocals to exist, where a certain crash cymbal tends to ring. Every cymbal is very different. Like there's certain frequencies that can sometimes just hang there where you don't notice it until you need something to exist in that space. That's where I'll go through, and throughout the mixing process, find little places to remove those spaces in each individual cymbal, if not the entire bus. Now, you can see that the overheads themselves have a little bit of compression, and this can be done to taste. This is, for this demo that we did, this is pretty mild. There's not like a ton of pull on it. There's not a ton of pull on this. You can see it's quite light. But once they all mix at the cymbal, certain things like the ride will set it off, but it just helps me kind of balance out where I want. And then like the EQ, you can see I do little moves like this to get rid of certain rings and whatnot. These are again, these are not like definitely do that frequency, definitely do that one. Like these are specific to this drum kit for what I need to do and what I didn't like and what I wanted to remove. You might like some of those. Moving on to the rooms. Again, it's finding the balance of the close versus the far, how much of that you want, and then taking your room and blending it in with your full drum kit, which you'll hear down at the full kit. Back here, all the way over here. That's where you'll want that. Little compression on each. You can see my EQ is, this is just like a bird's eye view of the EQ, but you can see I cut out a lot of low ends. Sometimes there's some mid-range stuff that's no good, the high stuff that rings. Each one's a little different. And then I'll just do a little compression to kind of even it out. And you can hear in these rooms, for the most part, it's mostly snare. I don't do a lot of toms in this one, or definitely the kick drum is pretty light. Like you don't hear that low end because it can kind of create this woofiness that that I don't like in this example. So customize how you like. Once those all meet down at let's see where we're at. We're at the full kit. I'm gonna take this off. It comes down to two simple things: compression and EQ. How much of certain frequencies do I have that I don't want? Carving those things out, finding the right balance of those, and then compressing heavy, light, wherever I want it to be. And this is where I would get it to at the full kit level first. So you can hear it's pushing. It's not super compressed, but what I like to do then is go to this parallel compression. See, I have a send that goes to this channel on its own, and if I remember, this is at 3. Okay, so if I were to just solo the parallel compression, turn this all the way off. Hear how crushing that is? You can do more of that if you want, or you can do less. This is basically an EQ where I'm just getting rid of a few things that come out in the compression that I don't like. So I take a little bit of that away. And then the compressor is just slammed. You know, I use a bus compressor, SSL bus compressor, and I just slam it, you know, fast attack, pretty fast release, ratio is really high, and then, you know, just adjust how much you want taken out. Some people will really slam it, but for me, I found that this was where I wanted it. And then when you bring the full drum kit back in and you mix them together at your drum bus, oh, it was at 3. I'll blend in the difference so you can hear, and turn on this last stage of processing. On my last stage, I have basically a bus compressor. For this one, it'd be the BG drums, and just a little bit of compression there, nothing too crazy. And then adding a clipper to add the clipping effect, and then the Kramer tape will just be a way to kind of dirty it up, to kind of give it like some like light distortion in a way. Not like super heavy. This is just like to bring out transients and to create kind of a dirtying effect of the drums. It kind of squashes it together a little bit differently. It's got its own type of compression that's unique to that style. So I was going to show you this compressor, or parallel compressor. So I turn that all the way down. You can hear not only it gets a little bit louder, but it adds like a kind of like fighting effect to the drums. It gives it kind of this like lively feeling. Notice how the kick drums, they don't sound like total machine guns. Like there's the clarity in the kit is really nice, but it doesn't, like the amount of sampling they did really yielded great results with making it sound as real as possible, but still having that punch. So remember that this is something I've done a lot of processing afterwards, but this is just at a demo level for like when bands come in and we do stuff in the studio. We have these presets set up so that we can just have a great sounding drum kit that when they walk away with their demo at the end of the day, that it has a really professional feel to it, rather than just kind of like a really thrown together crappy demo. We could use these same things for a full production, for a full album. The last couple albums that I've done were all done with stuff like this, and just some sampling on top, maybe like a little kick, a little bit of snare. But it's definitely an amazing tool to use for either the writing process, especially if it's already set up and you don't have to mess with tones every time you sit down to write. And it's great for your final product. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, leave them below, and have fun playing around with it. GGD Invasion. Check it out. See you later.